Hello, everyone. My name is Dylan Atlas Baker. I will be your host, your presenter for today's webinar. Today is all about preparing your LookML and your Looker instance for GenAI and conversational analytics. So 2 weeks ago, in our last webinar, we demoed the Explore Assistant in Looker and basically how you can build interactive, like conversational data products with tools like Gemini and Vertex and basically any LLM that you want, plus Looker. And today we're going to talk a little bit about not the technical side of setting it up, but actually how you best prepare your Looker instance and your Looker project for all these tools, whether that's kind of the Explore Assistant, tools that you might build yourself, other tools that you can buy off the shelf elsewhere in the space. And so really today is all about like practical steps you can take today that will improve your Looker instance. They're all actually things that will improve your instance regardless of whether you're setting it up for GenAI and things like conversational analytics, but will be particularly useful as you start thinking about what the future of your Looker instance actually looks like. I gave my name. My name's Dylan Atlas Baker. I'm one of the co-founders here at Spectacles. I have about 8 years experience developing on Looker. I was part of one of the first large enterprise rollouts in 2016 here in the UK. I was then followed that on by being a Looker consulting partner for a number of years. So I've seen instances large and small, and now I run Spectacles, and we help lots of companies improve their Looker usage and get the most out of their Looker instances. If this is the first time you are joining us, we run these webinars every 2 weeks, every other Wednesday at exactly this time. So as I said, we did one 2 weeks ago on the Explore Assistant. Please feel free to check that out. You can find all of the recordings on our website at spectacles.dev. And in 2 weeks, we're really excited. We've got Sean Zinsmeister from Google, from Looker. He's the Director of Outbound Product Management for data analytics there. So he's going to be jumping on the webinar with us, and he's going to demo a bunch of the new stuff. So things like the Explore Assistant we talked about last week, as well as LookML Assistant, Conversational Analytics. All of that will be there next in 2 weeks' time. So on June 12th this time, don't miss it. That event will be going live on LinkedIn in the next day or so. So you'll be able to register for that as well. And we'd hope you join us in 2 weeks' time. These webinars really just to bring the Looker community together. They're not necessarily about Spectacles as a tool. They're really just about providing a single place for the Looker community to learn from each other, to learn interesting things, what's happening, what's new in the space. And that's what we'll be doing in 2 weeks' time with Sean. So we're really looking forward to it. On that note, let's jump in. So talk a lot about how to prepare your LookML and your Looker instance for these new kind of GenAI tools. And roughly, we break this down into 4 kind of categories, 4 themes that we're going to talk about today. The first is we're going to talk about how LLMs typically use your LookML, what we have seen as like how LookML and metadata from LookML is being consumed and used as part of some of these GenAI tools. So we're going to talk a bit about that first. We're then going to talk about our thesis as to like what we think, why we think certain things need to happen to your Looker project in order to get the most out of those. We're then going to talk about what those practical steps actually are that you can take on your Looker instance to get it ready. And then we're going to talk a bit at the end about benchmarking and how you might think about kind of measuring these things and how we kind of are thinking about backing up in a more quantitative way some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. If you're joining us on YouTube, if you're joining us on LinkedIn, please feel free to send questions as we go. I will see them as they come up. I will likely save most of them for Q&A at the end. But if I do see something that feels pertinent to answer as we go, I will grab it there as well. So please feel free to send questions. I will aim to answer as many as I can at the tail end of the webinar. Let's jump in. So how do LLMs use your LookML? In most cases, and this is not all cases, but in most cases that we have seen where people are doing kind of like conversational analytics, ways where you can ask a question in English or your language of choice in kind of natural language and get something back from Looker, it is happening in these 4 steps. The first step is that the process is that it's going, and not necessarily the LLM, but whatever you're interacting with, is fetching a bunch of information from your Looker instance. So that's things like what fields are available, maybe what explorers are available, maybe some example data that isn't from your Looker instance, but is from elsewhere. It's basically collecting a whole bunch of stuff, and it's then stuffing that into a prompt. So as we saw last week, and I'm going to show in a second as well, it's not that these things are typically running on like particularly like models that are trained for Looker or LookML. It is that they're just shoving a bunch of context into a single prompt, and they are using that to then send the prompt to the model and get the results. So it is that you go get all the fields, get whatever you need to tell a model how it should be able to do something, stuff that information in, send it off to ChatGPT, Gemini Pro, whatever whatever model you're using, and then get the result back. This is not what all tools out there are going to be doing, but this is what we have seen. We've spoken to a lot of people, both kind of things that Looker is building as well as other people who've built stuff on top of Looker. And this is what is happening 95% of the time. And so there may be exceptions, but this is by far the most common way of approaching this. And so what that typically looks like is something like this. And this is actually, some of you may recognize the prompt that is used as part of Looker's new Explore Assistant when you ask a question of it. So this is literally what goes to Gemini Pro when you use the Explore Assistant to get data back. And so if we look at what's here, it's a prompt with some stuff kind of omitted, or data that would be inserted. What you have at the top is a context. So this is really the only instructions that the model is getting, saying, hey, you're a developer who would translate questions to a structured URL query, then give some instructions around only choose fields from the LookML metadata below, prioritize certain bits of information that we're going to give you to know what fields to use, generate only one answer, never respond with SQL. So that's kind of the like, hey, LLM, here's what I want you to do. And then there's a bunch of metadata. So in the case of the Explore Assistant, it goes and grabs all the dimensions from an Explorer. It goes and grabs all the measures from the Explorer. And in both those cases, that includes labels, descriptions, and tags. So it's stuffing a bunch of information, whatever you have given it, into this prompt to get the best results from it. In the case of the Explore Assistant, it then also goes and fetches a bunch of examples that you've typically stored in BigQuery. And then your request goes at the bottom. So it's things like, show me the number of monthly active users on our platform for each month of the last year. And so that might be what goes in the request, the input section. And really that is kind of highlighting, I guess, what I talked about in the last slide. It's going and getting all this information. It's generating this prompt, and then it's sending it to a model. And in most cases, including the Explore Assistant, that is what is happening. And so what you have available to you in terms of the levers you can control is making the things that go in here as helpful as possible for the model. And our thesis is basically, if you produce really high quality LookML and you have the black box that is the LLM, you will profit. This is a meme from, well, a screenshot from South Park for those who recognize it. But really the key bit is this like phase one, which is what you can do in control is produce really high quality LookML. And I'm going to talk about what that practically looks like. And that helps produce the highest quality prompt that then produces the highest quality response. And really that is what you want to do. You want to be able to help these tools as much as possible so that you can really leverage these new models, these new features and functionality that are coming out to the best of their abilities. And so everything that I'm about to go through is really focused on the production of high quality LookML. For those of you who have attended some of these webinars in the past, you know we're not particularly like salesy about SpecTools, the tool that we've built. And that's definitely not the intention for this webinar either. But what you will find is that the solution to lots of the things that help you produce high quality LookML will, at least in some small part, be something relating to SpecTools. And we really I didn't go out to make this presentation or think about this topic in a way that was geared around us. And I hope you'll take my word for that. But you will find that a lot of the things that help you produce high quality LookML, SpecTools does assist with, because that really is kind of like what our product does. What I'm going to talk about are these 5 things that you can do in your LookML that basically help that thesis of, if you produce high quality LookML, you'll produce a high quality prompt, which gets a high quality response from an LLM. What is great about the 5 things here, which are adding descriptions and tags, enforcing naming conventions, removing unused fields, cleaning up your SQL, and deleting unused content, is that they also are going to help your existing Looker usage. If you do all these things, you are likely to have happier non-AI users, like business users across your organization, are going to be able to use Looker to the best of its abilities. because you're going to have a really lean, well-documented like Looker project that provides a really nice UX to all of your internal like business users. But there are also things that will massively improve the quality of response you get from these new GenAI tools. So the first one I'm going to talk about is adding descriptions and tags. As we saw in that prompt at the beginning of the webinar, when we stuff information about fields from an Explorer into a prompt, most tools are going to pull in things like the label, the description, and the tags. And these can have a massive impact on the accuracy with which the model is going to pick the right fields to use to answer a certain question. And so if you start with what's on the left here of like just a bare dimension that has like really the bare minimum of what it needs to be functional in Looker, it will still like pill the right thing a lot of the time, some of the time, but you're going to be far from guaranteed that it's pulling the right thing. And so if we look on the right-hand side, when you add a label, you add a description like the sale price of the line item, you add the currency, and then you add tags, we have found that significantly improves the quality of response you get. The way we think about this is kind of ties into how Looker has built these things, which is in the description, you want to put anything like public facing that you'd expect your end user to see in a Looker Explorer, in a Looker dashboard. And then the tags, you can kind of put everything else. And so we've seen people do a lot of things. Synonyms are a really useful thing to put in here. You see I put cost and paid amount and things like that in the tags. But you can also put much more verbose things. Use this when you are asked a question about this topic is like a thing that we've seen people put in there, and that has really helped results. Putting in, we were talking to someone on the Looker side last week, and he said, there often there's a dimension called repeat purchase rate or something like that, and the tags they put like propensity to buy or things like that. So there's these kind of synonyms, but you might not immediately tie them, or an LLM might not immediately tie them together. Putting all of that in here is going to really improve the results you get from these things, just because it has so much more context from which to pull the relevant fields. And so, as I said, descriptions for things that you would normally want public in your instance, and then tags for really anything else. The easiest way to do this, to enforce this and to keep this to a high standard is with a linter. So we have our own linter in Spectacles, this what we call our style validator, that where we enforce things like all dimensions need to have description, or all dimensions need to have tags, or things like that. And so we provide that. There are also other ones out there. LLMs is probably the other most popular one that people use. But if you want to ensure, hey, no one should merge a change to Looker that doesn't have a description or a tag on each thing, using these linters is going to be the most reliable way to do it. You could do it with just like code review and things like that. You'll probably just find you spend a lot of time enforcing these things. And so we really recommend using a linter for that. Is going to be by far the fastest way. There is like a cold start problem in that if you have an existing Looker instance and it's quite large, there's obviously not everyone has been insisting on these things forever. We know people are using things like Copilot or Cursor, or even like just sending it to something like Gemini to like do a first draft of descriptions for everything. And so there's going to be ways that you can find to do that kind of en masse in a reasonably efficient way. But certainly for going forward, enforcing a linter like the Spectacle Style Validator or LLMs is going to be what you want to do. The second thing is enforcing naming conventions. So this can often be just like making sure that dimensions are sensibly named, but also that things that are similar might follow similar naming conventions. So measures that are sums, starting them all with total underscore, for example, we have found can just like help these models navigate the data a bit more effectively. So that's all really we're trying to do. We're trying to provide data that is as structured as possible so it can figure out what the right way to do things is. And so another case here that I've got on the slide is, we've got delivered Boolean, returned Boolean, which may be obvious to a model, but it may not be. And we found that things like was delivered or was returned, particularly if you put a label with a question mark in there, is going to get much better results. And so, as I said, it can be things like all sums need to start with total underscore. All like yes, no fields need to start with is or was underscore. Things like that can both improve the quality of your LookML and help like developers navigate it more easily because they immediately know what something is when they look at it, but also can generate much higher quality results from these GenAI tools. And again, the way that you might want to enforce that is with a limiter. Those are pretty much the same type of thing. It's someone's making a change to the code. We want to make sure they're following our guideline, and Spectacles can help you there. Labs can help you there. The third is removing unused fields from your LookML. You basically want to make the LLM's job and your user's job much easier. The idea here is that you, in many cases, particularly in the case of the Explorer Assistant today, and that doesn't mean that it won't change in the future, every field in an Explorer is being passed into the prompt. And that means that if you have, let's say, hundreds or thousands of fields, which lots of Explorers do, it might make it slightly harder for the model to pinpoint the ones that are relevant. A best practice, we think, for Liquid Explorers is to remove unused fields from your code base. It's just if like 40% of the fields in your Explorer aren't being used, they're really just cluttering the UX for your users. And it's kind of the same idea for the LLM, is you're just providing a bunch of things that you actively, like, if no one's using it, it's probably not the answer to the question that someone is asking of the GenAI tool. And you just want to strip it out from the Explorers and really help refine it as much as possible. There will be things in the future like, you create embeddings for all of your dimensions and maybe pass them in dynamically. And I guess, like, particularly in that case, you want to make sure you're not like selectively passing things in that aren't being used. And so we really recommend trying to pare down that Explorer to the things that you know are important. And for some people, that's going to be 80% of the fields that are in there. For some people, that's really as low as like 25% of the fields that are in an Explorer. Often, really a tiny subset of what is in your Explorer is being actively used. There's a couple tools out there to help you do this. We think the best is the new LookML management tool that we released a while back, which scans your usage, scans your code base, and highlights things that you can remove from your code base, whether that's like entire views, fields, joins, explorers. You can also probably use Henry, which is an open source tool that was built by some of the team at Looker. To do this, you could do it manually, possibly with your system activity data, though it requires a lot of like munging of the data. But we would recommend using the LookML management tool that we provide. We've had feedback from people since we released this a couple months ago that they've deleted tens of thousands of lines of code from their code base, which is great. And we have seen that if you prune those fields down in a given Explorer, you do get significantly better answers or more reliably better answers from these GenAI systems. So the idea there is, limit stuff, remove stuff that is never being used. If your users aren't using it, it is almost certainly not an answer to like a future question. Very rarely do we see a field that hasn't been used for 3 years suddenly get a lot of usage or be the relevant field to use in a particular question. And so that's the third, I think, change that you can make to your code base that's going to make a difference there. The fourth is cleaning up your SQL. And so here, the idea is basically that you don't want the whatever GenAI tool you're using to go and ask a question that uses like a legitimate LookML query, but then ultimately fails at the database level. There's a lot of trust. Like, I think with data products generally, you're trying to build trust with the end user, but I think particularly for these new things where we've all experienced like hallucinations and things like that from LLMs. I think as you deploy these things in your organization or to your customers, ensuring that trust is kept very high is really important. And these things falling over at the point of running the query can really erode that trust. And so in the case of Looker, most LLMs are going to generate Looker queries, not SQL. We saw that with the Explorer Assistant, that it's generating like an Explorer and a URL syntax that generates a query in an Explorer. And then Looker converts that from the LookML into a SQL query. And if the SQL has errors, then so will the query that it generates and runs, and this erodes trust in the LLM. And so you really, really want to stay on top of those SQL errors. Again, this is useful for all your end users in Looker as well. Like if they go in and select a bunch of fields and they find that Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks, Redshift, whatever warehouse you're using, returns an error, one, that's like bad. It's not great that there's a bug in your system, and it just erodes trust in Looker and the work that you're doing. But particularly in a GenAI context, you really want to make sure that everything that is going to get run is going to run successfully, because you want to keep that trust level high. Here, you could go into Looker and select every field in every Explorer and make sure it runs, or you can use the Spectacle SQL Validator. The SQL Validator is available open source or hosted, so you don't need to come and use necessarily the hosted tool. There is an open source CLI that you can use to run the SQL Validator, and that basically just goes in and checks that every field in your Looker instance, every dimension, is going to run successfully against the warehouse when it does. It checks, SQL and derived tables. It checks the SQL syntax in dimensions. It checks join keys, things like that, and that will make sure that if that all works at the Explorer level, then as long as the LLM, the GenAI tool, is building a valid query from a Looker point of view, that's going to return valid SQL and get you a reliable result. So number 4 is cleaning up your SQL. Again, just a good best practice for Looker generally. And then the 5th is deleting unused. And this is for a slightly different reason, which is that some tools that we've seen out there aren't generating queries themselves, but are identifying the most relevant content already in your Looker instance. And so you only really want to highlight content that you're confident in, which typically correlates with content that's being actively used. And so we highly recommend deleting unused content. Again, this also just improves data discoverability for your users in Looker. But for these tools, and there's a handful out there that we've seen that are really relying on hey, here's the relevant piece of content that answers your question. You likely want to make sure that all of that content is there for as high quality as possible and has eyeballs on it on a regular basis as a result, kind of to validate that it's still relevant and accurate. And so yeah, deleting unused content it can massively help that and help your Looker usage generally. Again, we last year released a content management tool that helps you do this. So it helps you identify all content that's been unused, and it helps you delete it. It allows you to do things like notify the owner and notify anyone who's used the content in the last year and allow them to opt out of the deletion and things like that. So again, we've about 50 companies who have been using this tool for the last couple months and have deleted something like 27,000 pieces of Looker content. We find most people have a percentage unused in the last 90 days between 65% and 85%. So that's somewhere between kind of 2/3 of their content and upwards having not been used in the last 90-day period, and drive that down to 20% or sub 20%, which is good for your Looker instance, but also really good for these specific tools that aren't like the Explorer Assistant that write their own query, but other ones that are kind of scanning through the content and finding the ones that are the most relevant. There are a couple other ways to do this if you don't want to use our tool for that. There is a bunch of, this is one where the data is reasonably accessible in the System Activity Explorers. So if you go there and build out your reports there, you will be able to identify this, and then you need to manage the deletion yourself and things like that. We did a webinar on the System Activity Explorers middle last year, summer last year. So if you head to spectacles.dev, our website, and go through the webinars, you'll be able to find that and watch that if the System Activity Explorers aren't something that you're familiar with. And so those are the 5 changes that we really recommend making. Adding descriptions and tags, enforcing naming conventions, removing unused fields, cleaning up your SQL, and deleting unused content. If you do those 5 things, you'll likely have a much more performant, happier Looker project and Looker instance and end users. But it also happens to help all of these use cases that we're talking about and that are going to become more prevalent as more and more of this stuff, more of these features get released in the future. The final thing I want to talk about a bit is benchmarking. And so a lot of what we have based all of this on is our experience and the experience that others have shared with us of things that work really well for refining these models. But there is, last year, towards the end of last year, put out a study that benchmarked some of these things and provided a playbook for how you might benchmark this stuff. And so one of the things we will be doing going forward and we'll be sharing out, so keep an eye out for it, is kind of a quantitative benchmark of the impact that these things have on the types of answers that they ask in this paper. And so if it is of interest, if this kind of topic theoretically is interesting to you, I'd highly recommend this report. If you search data.world AI benchmark, I'm sure you'll find it. But it's really interesting. It's not overly complex, and they provide a lot of examples and all of that in the paper, and there's blog posts that surround it as well. So that is something that we're going to be looking to do in the next little bit, to kind of quantify some of this stuff a little more robustly. And so keep an eye out and have a go look have a look at that if you do want to see kind of how some of this stuff works and how we evaluate some of these things. I'm going to do Q&A in just a second. So if people do have questions, want me to go over any of this or have things that I haven't covered, please let me know. And while I wait for any questions that come in, I just want to signpost the webinar in 2 weeks again. We're really excited to have Sean on. He's going to be showing a bunch of the cool things that they've been working on in Looker at Google. And so, yeah, that's 2 weeks today. That event will go live on LinkedIn in the next day or so. So head over there to sign up for it. And on that note, I would love to answer any questions that people might have if they do have them. And let me move here and take the slides off the page. So yeah, if you have any questions, if you drop them in LinkedIn or YouTube, wherever you're watching, I will see them on my side. I'm happy to answer anything that comes up. And if there aren't any, also totally fine. We'll give it a second for people to write anything they might want to ask about. Maybe no questions today. If you do find yourself watching this after the fact, well, we do have one. What is your opinion on database prep? I think I can put that up on screen. There we go. I think so. I guess it depends on exactly what you mean, Bart, on database prep, and you can feel free to, if you want to add some more color or context as I'm answering this, please feel free to do so. It is not something that we have thought that much about yet. I think that is I think to the extent that you're using the semantic layer as the interface for these models, as long as that semantic layer is well written and you built that well with the right joins and things like that, and the SQL all runs, you don't have SQL errors in your project. I think we have not found a reason to think that much about what happens underneath that, as long as it all runs performantly. I think there will be use cases where fetching values for filters and things like that is a little fuzzy with these things thus far. When someone says, hey, show me it for this thing, show me all sales for this SKU, they might not have typed in that SKU explicitly, and to get that filter right, the LLM might need to go down to the tool might need to go down to the table to get distinct values and assess which ones are the most relevant. And again, you're going to want that to be all as performant as possible. But otherwise, it's not a thing that I think we have a strong opinion on. Really, as long as your semantic layer, your LookML, runs successfully and properly, and those tables, it can build those queries and they'll run successfully. That is where we've seen the biggest benefit, because ultimately these tools aren't leveraging the schema of the underlying database all that much, at least for the tools on top of Looker that we have seen thus far. Question here: how do you decide how to prioritize parts of the project to get AI ready first? I think this is going to depend a little on what your use case is. Often, I think in the Looker context, people are focusing this on an explore. They're turning it on for an explore, one explore at a time on an explore by explore basis. And so I think thinking about it that way is obviously going to define some of the constraints, but then you still have the choice of the 5 things we listed today. Descriptions, labels, and tags, I think, are by far the biggest lift. I think what we have seen is those, if you do only one of the 5 things we've talked about, that is probably the one you want to do. Just really put effort into getting those labels right, getting those descriptions right, getting those tags right. That seems to be where the biggest bang for your buck is. I think removing unused fields is probably I think cleaning your SQL is the other one. You just don't want these these tools hitting errors. and running into issues because it just like totally erodes trust. So it probably goes for me: descriptions, labels, tags, SQL, and then cleaning up fields. I think those are the top three, and definitely in those orders, heavily indexed on the writing of descriptions and labels and tags. Question from LinkedIn: does Looker send just metadata to the LLM, or will it send actual data? I guess like Looker explicitly doesn't do any of this today. There is an Explore assistant that you can install that does this. In that use case, it does just send metadata. It basically includes what was in the first prompt of the webinar, which is dimensions and related information about the dimensions, measures and related information about the measures, example data or example like queries, which doesn't include any data, and then the question being asked. So it is really just metadata. It's not even sending things like a client ID or a client secret for your Looker instance. So that is in that case. Other tools, there are, what we've been talking about today is, I guess, like there's a whole breadth of tools that are using Looker semantic layer to answer these types of natural language questions. Some of those may use more actual data. I don't know, and you need to go and kind of evaluate each tool itself. But in the case of what we've seen on the Looker side with the Explore Assistant, it is just using metadata from your semantic layer. And let me take that off the screen. And I think, apologies if I'm missing anyone's question, but I think that is it for today. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope this has been useful to all of you. We really appreciate all the questions and all the input from you, the community. We will be back in 2 weeks with Sean, who's going to demo a bunch of new cool stuff. So please do join us for that. If you're an organization out there that is doing something cool in Looker, you're a Looker user, you're a consultancy that deploys Looker, and you've got something interesting you want to talk about or you think would be interesting to the community, please do get in touch. We'd love to kind of give you this platform to talk about what you've been working on, to like share what you've got with other Looker users. And so please do get in touch. You can do it through our website, or it's dylan@spectacles.dev if you just want to email me directly. And then one final question was, will you upload the recording? Yes, you can see all of these recordings wherever you're watching it today. So if you're on YouTube or you're on LinkedIn, you will be able to see it there. We also upload them all. We embed them on our website. So if you're struggling to find it, you can do it there as well. Awesome. Well, thank you very much again, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Have a great day wherever you are.